And former Vice President Dick Cheney is being laid to rest today. Past presidents will be among the mourners at Washington National Cathedral. The Republicans considered one of the most influential vice presidents in U.S. history, but he leaves behind a complicated legacy as a key architect of the Iraq War. And we're seeing live images now of preparations underway for that funeral service. Dick Cheney served as vice president to President George W. Bush, who plans to give remarks at today's service. Cheney's daughter, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, and his grandchildren will also speak, and President Biden plans to attend. Now let's bring in White House correspondent Karen Travers and ABC's Perry Russom at National Cathedral for more. Karen, you're there at the White House. Who else is attending, and why are President Trump and Vice President Vance not there?
Diane, this is going to be a who's who of the Republican Party before the era of Donald Trump. And there is, of course, no love lost between President Trump and the Cheney family. And he is not going to be attending the funeral today at the Washington National Cathedral. As you mentioned, former President George W. Bush will be delivering remarks. Former President Biden will also be in attendance there. And we're going to hear remarks from Liz Cheney, the vice president's daughter, as well as the Cheney grandchildren. But the president will not be attending because there was a very bitter public feud between Cheney and the president. Remember, last year, Cheney said he was voting for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump in the election. He called Trump one of the most grave threats to democracy that this country has ever faced and said he should never be returned to power. He started that criticism after Trump pushed back on the election results in 2020 and, of course, the attack on the U.S. Capitol. And then it became personal when the president went after his daughter Liz Cheney for her work on the January 6th committee. So very notable today that this will be happening just a couple miles here from the White House, but the president will not be attending. Diane, the flags are still lowered here at the White House to half staff, but the president has not even commented on Cheney's passing.
Perry, what can we expect to hear today from the people closest to Cheney?
Yeah, I think we're going to hear the story of a man who rose the ranks here in Washington from White House Chief of Staff under President Ford to becoming a congressman, then Secretary of Defense, then ultimately the Vice President of the United States. He's one of those old school politicians in Washington, D.C., in a system that now rewards the outsiders. So very interesting to see how the politics here in Washington has changed in the last 20, 25 years, really. Also very curious to see how the speaker today addresses politics. Back in the early mid-2000s, he was one of the leading voices, if not the leading voice, of the Republican Party. Then later in life, as Karen mentioned, he became one of the most vocal Republican critics of now President Trump. But it's very clear he has respect from both sides of the aisle. Former Presidents Biden and Bush are going to be here, and we are going to hear from former President Bush as he eulogizes his former vice president.
And Karen, you were in embed on the Bush-Cheney campaign in 2004 and spent months with the former vice president. What stands out to you most from your time on the trail with him?
He was a forceful defender of the administration's policies after 9/11, including the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that did not make him popular in the country, especially with Democrats who vilified him. But he was popular among conservatives, and that's why he was out there on the campaign trail. And he was saying, essentially during that campaign, Diane, that the country had not been hit again with a terrorist attack. And that is why you needed to vote again for Bush and Cheney. The other thing, too, on that campaign was his family was there. The vice president's wife was traveling. His daughter Mary was a key advisor on the campaign, and his grandkids traveled too. They'll be speaking today at the funeral service.
All right, Karen Travers, Perry Russom, thank you both.